Today we will be continuing the series of export import and its documentation, and within that series we will be today discussing about the role of documentation in the international trade. Now, since we have already spoken about the Incoterms and its relevance, we have talked about various methods of payments in international trade. Now comes a very crucial component of this entire international business transaction. When we say that we need to have these terms and conditions, supposingly some specific Incoterms or some specific method of payment. So how do we go for the compliance of the same? How do we say about that, okay, these being the essential criterions that needed to be there? So this is all done through proper completion of documentation. So when we say that trade, so the trade backbone lies onto these documentation. So that is why they are very crucial when conducting an international business transaction. So in case a person who fails to produce these documentation, then it can also hinder the dispatch of the products by a manufacturer or maybe exporter, and ultimately it will impact the entire transaction, whereby the goods will not be timely received by the importers. Because what will happen, that in case these documents are not provided, for example your commercial invoices, for example your bill of lading or a packing list, then in that case the failure to comply with the import or the export documentation requirement will regard to your stringent fines or penalties, because you are not complying with the standard of the documentation. So when we say that, what is the relevance of these documentation in international trade? So basically by that we means that this is like a backbone of this entire international business transaction, wherein both the parties are required to comply by the basic formalities. So even when we say that we are going to follow these very Incoterms, then also there is one unsaid rule that is like a mandate. So for both the importers and the exporters, which calls for the cooperation with respect to documentation formalities from both the parties. So when we say cooperation, so cooperation means herein that whatever documents are required from, let's suppose, the importer or the exporter, so both the parties are subject to provide the documentation without any hindrances, because that will only make it possible to conduct the transaction in a better manner. So basically when we say about these documentation, they are of very crucial relevance, because first it will ensure that there is a very smooth transaction between parties, because it gives what? It gives a legal compliance to the documents. It provides a legal compliance to the transaction. So with this adherence to the legal, financial or regulatory requirements, so that gets completed by these documents only. So that is why it is very crucial to have the documents in place, and all the mandatory documents, because otherwise there are many documents which are required to complete a transaction. But when we say international transaction, there are one specific documents like your commercial invoice, like in certain cases the countries will be asking for certificate of origin or for your bill of lading. So accordingly, whatever mode of transportation one is opting for, the documents always come in place. So that is why we say that these documents, they hold a very crucial relevance in an international transaction. So if I have to speak about what being the very crucial aspect of a document, so number one I would say about that, there is a regulatory requirement. Each country, they have their own set of laws, regulations or policies with respect to your import and export of goods, and through these proper documentation they will ensure that all the businesses, that means your exporters or importers, they are supposed to comply with the custom regulations, tariffs and trade restrictions of both the exporting and the importing countries. So that is why we say that regulatory requirements are like a backbone, because this is what it assures you about the payment. So when we have already discussed about those Incoterms, or when we already talk about those payments of transaction or different methods of your payment, so therein we talk about very specific documents that are supposed to be provided by both the parties, and that documentation itself contains the choice of mode of your transportation, the choice of method of payment, or what being the liabilities of both the parties with respect to conducting in transaction. So that is why when we are talking about the legal adherence, that legal adherence is being provided solely through these documents. So that is why these documents, number one, provide this, complete this your regulatory requirement. Next is, it is also a contractual obligation. Now, how come a contractual obligation? Since you are dealing with the second party who belongs to a second nation, right? So when you are trading with that particular party which belongs to the second nation, you need to have a contractual obligation, because not just an agreement that one made an offer and it gets accepted by the other party and okay, we go by this agreement. That cannot be possible in an international transaction. In an international transaction, there need to be a legal backing of the same. That means agreement plus the legal compliance, then only it will be formed as a contract. And when we are talking about contract, so contract can only be executed with respect to your documentation. So when we are saying that we need to have a contractual obligation, by that we mean that there should be a sale contract, which often require that specific documentation are to be legally binding one, and they are the one which serve as a proof of each and every agreed upon terms. So when I say that with respect to the price, with respect to the delivery, product specification, mode of transportation, so every basic detail, every basic nitty-gritty of the transaction is there defined in this contractual obligation. So when we say that okay, the goods will be handed over to the freight forwarder, so the responsibility to hand over the goods to the freight over, that will also be defined into this contract, which will be conducted between both the parties. Similarly, if I say that I will be opting for these very Incoterms, that will also be defined into these contracts. So contract is what? It is a legal compliance. So that is why that document serve as a proof, a very valid proof that okay, this is what being agreed between two parties, and in case of any dispute, this document will be the one that has to be adhered to, because this is what both the parties have initially agreed. That is why we say that in case you want to change any method of payment, you want to change any price terms and conditions or delivery terms and conditions, both the parties have to agree in tandem with each other. Until or unless both the parties are in agreement, there cannot be any changes which can be bring subsequently into the terms or the conditions of the contract. So that is why these documents, they play a very crucial role. And apart from that, legal compliance, because legal compliance is just like a very basic element which will be there into each and every aspect or the subdomain that we refer to with respect to the significance of the documentation in the international trade. So when we say there that these documents are required, so apart from serving as a proof or a supporting evidence, these documents help us easily clear all the customs formalities or to complete by your custom clearances or declaration. So documents are again required when you need to go through filling out those forms for the custom clearances or making any declaration with respect to the goods that being exported or imported, because accordingly customs duty will be levied. So that is why for custom clearance also and declaration also, you will be requiring those documents, supposingly the commercial invoice, right? So that will entail all the description about the goods, the quantity, the HSN code, the type of the good, and what being the price of the goods or the terms and conditions they are mentioned into the invoice. So accordingly, you will make a a validation or a declaration into the customs form. Similarly, when we are going for that classification or the valuation of the goods as per different duties, because under customs you are you are supposed to pay the duty charges whether it's import or exports, though exports are your zero rated supplies, but otherwise there are certain other charges which are there which are applicable in case of your exports. So now when we are talking about this classification or valuation, again for that classification, for that valuation, you need to have a proof, okay, that these are the goods, commodity A being exported by ABC Limited. So what being the valuation of the goods? So that is what is being validated through these documents only. Further on, if we say about that what being the role of these documents in order to ensure that continuity in this supply chain management, in order to ensure that goods are procured from the manufacturer, or let's suppose the goods being manufactured at a point and from that point to ultimately reaching the point of destination. So there are various layers of activities that needed to be conducted in between. So in order to conduct those transactions which come into this entire phase of conducting various activities, so that being also managed through this supply chain management, and this supply chain management can only be feasibly conducted, or there cannot be any disruptions if there are being provision of very documents that being provided at different stages of this transferring over the goods from one point to another point. So that is why it is very much required. Further is when we say that we want to secure get a very secured method of payment, for example your letter of credit, or for example your documentary credit, or any other method of your payment, let us suppose open account method, right. So for each and every method you need a document to the contrary, because without those documents, what will serve as a collateral to the bank onto which the assurance will be given by the bank, or the those you could say handling activities will be taken over by the bank. So in order to conduct those handling activities, the bank requires these documents as a proof of transaction. So these documents, they also serve as a financial security and risk management document. So financial security and risk management, for example, if one wants to procure the loan or a credit on the basis of these documents, that can only be possible if one has provided sufficient proof that okay, this credit will be repaid after a certain time, or I just put my consignment as a collateral for the same. So even for the security risk management, these documents serves as a big you could say as a back or for these conducting or to say conduct a safeguard against the risk, right. Similarly, you have taken an insurance for the goods or the cargo, whatever mode of transportation it may be rail, road, airways, or your sea, right. So in whatsoever mode of your transportation you are opting for insurance, again for taking that insurance or to reflect that you have taken an insurance for these many commodities or this much value of the consignment, you need these documents serve as a very valid proof, as a substantial proof which ensures okay that the insurance being taken up, insurance being taken from which agency, for what period of time is it applicable, or for what part of the consignment is your insurance applicable, and what is the amount of insurance one is paying, what are the terms and conditions of the insurance. So for each and every aspect, this documentation procedure is very much crucial. Similarly, if let us suppose that there comes any dispute between both the parties, be it your importers or exporters, so these documents are the first thing to refer to or to adhere to. So as we mentioned that contractual obligation, so what being defined into that contract of sale, that being your very terms and conditions onto which that entire transaction of buying and selling would be conducted. So if there being any deviation from that, or if there being any dispute between both the parties, so these documents will serve as a mechanism to resolve those disputes, because this is what will be the court or the tribunal will be asking for in case of the dispute between both the importers and exporters. Similarly, if one wants to seek any changes into terms and conditions, or if one wants to go for any change into the method of payment, these documents are the first one to refer to. So that is why dispute resolution can only be possible through these documentation. Further, when we see about taxation and accounting. Now, taxation and accounting means that when you want to reflect your books of account, so those books of account clear what will be the basis for reflecting, okay, these many duties have accrued onto this very consignment that been conducted in the relevant previous year. So those documents would reflect, okay, that this voyage has been taken place from point A B to point B for the exporter ABC Limited to the importer PQR Limited. So when we are conducting that transaction, that this much part of your consignment being subject to your taxation. So for those purposes also the documents serve as a very crucial proof. So taxation, for taxation you need a great number of your documents, rather you need both the digital and your otherwise paper documents, right, because you need to also make a compliance onto your IceGate portal, you need to make a custom declaration before getting your goods clearance for home consumption in case of your imports. So in order to make your books of account, in order to abide for the taxes, you require these documentary proofs, then only this transaction may be concluded or may be completed, right. And if you are not having these documentation, then again there will be sort of you could say misappropriation in the accounts, or that can be a possibility, or the accounts would reflect different values if there not being any supporting document, or let's for example if the accounts reflects different value as per books of accounts and as per taxation records. So then again these documents will help to reconcile both the accounts as per your accounting standards and your accounts as per your taxation standards. So that will help you reconcile the both. So that is why there is very crucial relevance of these documentation in trade. Now, when we are talking about this documentation in trade, there are various common documents that are being used irrespective the nature of the country, the type of commodity that one is dealing up with. So there are various common documents, the number one being your pro forma invoice. Now, as the name indicates, this pro forma invoice, it serves as a very prior document, a priori document, which is just like before conducting a proper commercial invoice, you are running this pro forma invoice, which is used for what? As a negotiating tool between both your seller and buyer, and before this export shipment. Now this will be used by what? This will be used by the exporter to quote the price of the consignment at the beginning of this entire transaction. Now what will happen? Your exporter will do what? It will quote a price to the importer. So that price quoting will be done through this pro forma invoice, because this quoting of the goods before securing a transaction, it is obviously being done at the beginning of an export transaction, and it will eventually, if not if there being not being any dispute, so this will eventually become your final commercial invoice that will be used when the goods are being cleared through your customs into the importing country. So basically it's just like your a drafted, a tentative version wherein you are quoting your price, you are quoting your terms and conditions, and most of the time this exporter they quote such prices or such terms and conditions which are well accepted by the importers, because exporters are already aware about the market conditions, they are already aware about the competition in the market. So that is why they will quote such a price which will be acceptable or at least be a competitive one in the global markets, right. So that is why it is said that it will eventually become a final commercial invoice, right. So this document will entail the description of the goods, for example the quantity, price, weight, type of goods, any other, let us suppose ISO specification, or you could say ISO standards to be complied with. So, everything is to be there, and all the nitty-gritties. For example, this is like a declaration by the seller that I will provide you these products or these services at this very specified price, at this very specified terms and condition, or this particular quantity at this particular rate. So, the date, the price, every basic term and condition is quoted into this pro forma invoice, and if there being no problems from the importer's end with respect to this pro forma invoice or the amount that being quoted, then it is what is finally accepted by the importer, and this will serve as your commercial invoice, right. So, this is just like a prelude to your commercial invoice, whereas commercial invoice again it is like a, which is a second type of your common document, which is a legal document between this exporter and buyer, and this is the document which will be used as a main document throughout this entire process of international transaction. So, when this entire transaction is being conducted, this very document which is your commercial invoice, it will be used by customs even in order to determine your customs duties. So, that is why we say that this being the primary document, one of the mandatory document that is required, right, in case of your this international transaction. So, it will clearly state that these goods are being sold and this much amount is to be paid by the importer. So, that is why the final document, because your that pro forma invoice is just like a prelude, like a code that is given to the exporter. This is what is the finally agreed upon legal document, and based on to that legal document your further duties, your further clearances, financial security, risk management, every other aspect will be dependent upon this major document, because everyone, be it your bankers, your freight forwarders or your insurance company, it will be asking for this commercial invoice, right. So, this commercial invoice is like your bill which being sent from the exporter to the importer, and just like your invoice, it will be used by the government also when they will be assessing, your assessing officer, whenever they will be computing about your customs duty onto the commodities. So, they will be referring to this very primary document which is your commercial invoice. And also further, this commercial invoice will also help the government to have a control over the imports, because that will specify that okay, which form, which number of copies, what language is to be used onto the same, because this is the document which will be used globally in a sense is that because this will be sent to your importer. So, it shall be you could say be written into what language or how many copies should be there should be triplicate or there should be 5 copies, 7 copies. So, each and everything is being listed out into this commercial invoice, and that is why it comes under the purview of your Ministry of Commerce, that they give you a format, or there is a typical description about what all things should be necessitated into this very document. So, this is like a detailed description with about the goods that being shipped, the quantity, values, any other relevant information. And as I already mentioned that this will be used by your assessing officers to compute your customs duty, right. So, just like one very important document which entails all the crucial information about that particular transaction, because it entails the date of your transaction, price of transaction, which is most important. So, that is why it is very important that this commercial invoice will be prepared with utmost attention, utmost diligence, so that there should not be any errors, because later on it is very difficult to rectify the same until there are errors of your omission, right. So, the amount that you quote, the conditions that you put, so everything being listed into this commercial invoice. Now, proforma invoice and the subsidiary or a main segment of the same as your commercial invoice, which serves as a primary main document. So, primary main document means whether you go by your seaways or any other mode of transportation, you need to carry this document. You need to have a certain copies of this document, because this document is what will be otherwise asked in case of imports also, because in case of imports, when the goods are subject to clearance for home consumption, then also the commercial invoice will be used so as to compute the duties on the same, right. Then only you will be seeing, for example, the duties on a cigarette is computed as per the length of the cigarette. So, this will entail this invoice, okay, that what commodity being traded, or what is the length of that article, or what is the make of that article, what being the component, what being the price, and how many packets. So, everything being the HSN classification, everything being there. So, that is why it is like a one of the mandatory document, one of the crucial document in course of your international transaction. We will be talking about various other crucial documents which form a very important part of this international transaction in the second segment. Thank you.